Imagine lying beneath the cold desert sky, the stars stretching endlessly above you while your body weakens with every passing breath. An Apache woman, her spirit worn and her strength nearly gone, closed her eyes that night, convinced her journey had ended. She had fought, run, and endured more pain than most could bear, but even the strongest warriors know when their battle is over, or at least that's what she thought, until fate placed her in the hands of someone she never expected. Her name was Nayeli, a woman whose life had always been marked by resilience. She grew up in the rugged lands of the Southwest, where survival was never promised, only earned. The land had taught her how to ride, how to track, how to fight, and most of all, how to endure. But nothing had prepared her for the ambush that shattered her world. A rival band had raided her small camp, scattering her people and leaving her wounded. Nayeli fought fiercely, but her injuries ran deep. Alone, thirsty, and weak, she wandered through the desert with no food, no horse, and no strength to keep going. By the third night, she could barely walk. She found a dry creek bed and laid herself down on the sand, whispering a prayer to her ancestors. She gave up hope, believing her spirit would soon leave her body and join the great ones who had come before. But when she opened her eyes again, it wasn't the afterlife she saw. It was the worn wooden beams of a small cabin ceiling, the faint glow of a lantern flickering in the corner. She was warm, wrapped in blankets, and her wounds had been carefully dressed. Panic surged in her chest. Where was she? Who had touched her? And then she saw him. A cowboy, tall and broad-shouldered, sat near the fire, a cup of coffee in his hand. His hat lay on the table beside him, and his weathered face carried both strength and gentleness. When he noticed her stir, he set the cup down and approached quietly, not wanting to startle her. "You're safe," he said softly. "Name's Samuel. Found you out there in the desert, barely breathing." Nayeli tried to sit up, but her body rebelled with pain. She fell back against the pillow, glaring at him with suspicion. Cowboys and settlers were rarely friends of her people. She had been taught to fear their rifles, their greed for land, and their disregard for her tribe's way of life. Yet here one stood, not as an enemy, but as a rescuer. Samuel could see the fear in her eyes. He didn't blame her. He'd lived enough years to understand that trust between their worlds was a fragile thing, but he also knew he couldn't just leave her out there to die. He'd already lost too many in his life. His wife to illness, his brother to war. He wouldn't carry another death on his conscience. For days, Samuel nursed her back to health. He brought her water, made broth from the little meat he had, and carefully changed her bandages. Nayeli spoke little at first, too weak and too guarded. But she observed him closely. His hands were rough, calloused from years of ranch work, yet careful when tending her wounds. His eyes, though tired, held no cruelty. Slowly, her suspicion softened into a wary curiosity. On the fourth day, she finally spoke. "Why help me?" Samuel leaned back in his chair, staring at the fire. "Because no one deserves to be left alone in the dirt. Not you. Not anyone." It was a simple answer, but it pierced through the walls she had built around herself. He asked for nothing in return, showed no sign of malice or ulterior motive. For the first time in weeks, Nayeli felt something stir inside her, a fragile ember of hope she thought she had buried with her prayer that night in the desert. As she grew stronger, she began to share pieces of her story. She spoke of her people, of her camp, of the raid that had scattered them. Samuel listened without judgment, never interrupting, never doubting her words. And when she asked about his life, he told her of his ranch, of the cattle he once managed, of the losses he carried like shadows on his back. They were two souls from different worlds, but pain had carved out similar scars in both of them. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon in shades of gold and crimson, Samuel offered her his horse. "You're well enough to ride now," he said gently. "If you want to find your people, I won't stop you. This mare will carry you far." Nayeli touched the horse's mane, her heart torn. Part of her yearned to search for her family, for the remnants of her people. But another part couldn't ignore the man who had saved her when she had already surrendered to death. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a question she couldn't yet voice. "Why give me your only horse?" she asked. Samuel shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Because you've still got a journey left. Mine's near its end. Seems only right that you ride." That night she didn't sleep. She thought of her ancestors, of the traditions of her people, of survival and gratitude. And when morning came, she made her choice, not out of obligation, but out of something far deeper. She stayed. Days turned into weeks. Nayeli found herself helping Samuel around the ranch, her strength returning with each passing day. She gathered water, tended the fire, and even helped mend fences. Samuel, in turn, taught her skills she had never needed before: roping, herding cattle, patching saddles. They worked side by side, often in silence, but the silence was never heavy. It was the kind that speaks of comfort and unspoken trust. Slowly, laughter returned to their days. One afternoon, when Samuel tripped over a bucket and landed squarely in the mud, Nayeli laughed so hard she nearly doubled over. He looked up at her, covered in dirt, and for the first time in years he laughed too. It was a sound that healed something in both of them, yet challenges still lingered. The land was harsh, and neighbors were suspicious. Word spread quickly when a cowboy was seen with an Apache woman. Some warned Samuel that he was inviting trouble, that she was dangerous, that their worlds were not meant to mix. Samuel stood firm. "She's not dangerous," he said. "She's alive. And she has more courage than most men I've ever known." Nayeli, too, wrestled with doubt. She missed her people, her family, her language spoken freely around a fire. Sometimes she would slip away into the hills to sing the old songs, her voice carrying into the wind. Samuel never stopped her. He understood that some roots cannot be severed even if new ones are planted. The turning point came one fateful evening. A storm rolled across the desert, fierce and unrelenting. The winds howled and the rain battered the small cabin. In the chaos, a tree crashed onto the roof, shattering beams and filling the room with debris. Samuel shielded Nayeli with his own body, taking the brunt of the fall on his shoulder. The injury was bad. For days he could hardly move, his strength drained. It was then Nayeli's turn to care for him. She hunted rabbits, gathered herbs, and bound his wounds with the same gentleness he had once shown her. Night after night she sat by the fire, watching over him, whispering prayers for his healing. In those quiet hours she realized that their bond was no longer one of rescuer and rescued. They had become something greater. Two souls bound by survival, by sacrifice, and by love unspoken yet deeply felt. When Samuel finally regained his strength, he found her asleep at his side, her head resting against his arm. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and in that moment, he understood what his life had been missing all along. Not just companionship, but someone who had seen him at his weakest and stayed. Their story did not end in grand declarations or sudden promises. It unfolded slowly, like the desert blooming after a storm. Samuel and Nayeli chose to walk together, not because their pasts were the same, but because their futures had become intertwined. She taught him the songs of her people, and he taught her the quiet joys of tending land, and though the world outside still questioned them, they had already found their answer. Hope, once lost, had returned in the most unexpected of places, in the heart of a cowboy's cabin, where an Apache woman who had given up on life discovered not just survival, but a reason to live again. By the time her story reached the ears of others, it carried with it a lesson that transcended culture and time. It reminded all who heard it that compassion has no borders, that love is not bound by heritage, and that sometimes the strongest bonds are born in the unlikeliest of moments. So if you find yourself on the edge of giving up, if you feel your journey is at its end, remember Niley's story. Remember that even in your darkest hour, life may surprise you. Hope may return, not in the way you expect, but in the form of a hand that refuses to let you fall. Nayeli's journey reminds us that even when we feel like all hope is gone, life has a way of placing the right people in our path. She lay down in the desert, ready to surrender to death, but opened her eyes in a cowboy's cabin. Proof that destiny often arrives when we least expect it. Samuel and Nayeli came from two different worlds, two different histories, yet pain, compassion, and courage built a bridge stronger than any barrier between them. Their story is not just about survival, but about trust, healing, and the power of unexpected kindness. It teaches us that true strength is not in how fiercely we fight alone, but in how deeply we choose to care for one another. And sometimes, the greatest miracles begin with a simple act of compassion. So, if you ever feel lost, broken, or ready to give up, remember Nayeli's story. Remember that your darkest night might just lead you to the dawn of a new beginning. Because hope is never truly gone, it only waits for the moment we are ready to see it again.